it rolling, Bob?
Is it rolling, Bob?
Is it rolling, Bob?
Hi folks, welcome back to Bob Dylan, A Head Full of Ideas. This is Chris Gregory here, and I'm going to start a series of podcasts on Bob Dylan's songs of social protest. And we're going to begin with a couple of quotes. The first one is a very, very famous one, which I think everybody learns in school these days. And this is from Martin Luther King, speech at the March on Washington, 28th of August, 1963. I still have a dream. It is a dream deeply rooted in the American dream. I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. And this is from Bob Dylan's song Talking New York, 1963. You sound like a hillbilly. We want folk singers here. Bob Dylan arrived in the bohemian oasis of Greenwich Village at the age of just 19 in 1961. He was determined to make his name as a folk performer. He'd already absorbed the influence of a whole range of American roots music, including the blues, gospel, country, bluegrass, and Appalachian folk. But it was as a protest singer, a composer of songs that attempted to expose the corruption, inequality, racism, and flag-waving militarism of American society that he first achieved significant fame. Amid the conventionality of 1950s and early 60s American society, the Village had developed a reputation as a mecca for nonconformists and social activists. It was home to a nascent countercultural movement which took its lead from radically hedonistic beat poets and writers like Allen Ginsberg and Jack Kerouac. The time of Dylan's arrival also coincided with the rise to prominence of the civil rights movement and the growing international tensions which threatened to bring the Cold War to a terrifying apocalyptic climax. It didn't take Dylan long to take up the mantle of his great hero Woody Guthrie as a social and political commentator. Between 1961 and 1963, Dylan poured out around 100 songs, many of them topical. Encouraged by his girlfriend Susie Rotolo, who was involved in various political groups, he began scouring newspaper reports for suitable topics. He'd also become an avid consumer of poetry, rapidly absorbing much of the canon of American, French, and British poetry. Displaying an incredible intellectual energy for one so young, he was able to synthesize both the radical and the conservative elements of village culture in a way that no other contemporary folk singer could match. As a keen practitioner of the folk process, virtually all of Dylan's protest songs rested on melodies that had been adapted from traditional or well-known tunes. Following the example of Guthrie's best-known works, the focus is always on communicating a strong political or social message. The voice of the narrators is usually that of Dylan himself. He usually adopted what sounded to those unfamiliar with folk styles as an uncompromisingly rough voice. This immediately alienated many listeners, but also helped to establish his own sound as being unique in the world of commercial music. It was a voice that was highly appropriate for communicating harsh truths. It certainly didn't stop him becoming a global star. Given that Dylan dashed off so many songs during this early period, it's perhaps not surprising that a few of them consist mainly of sloganeering and cliches. You've Been Hiding Too Long, a song with almost no discernible melody, which was only performed once at New York Town Hall in 1963, is an attack on false patriotism addressed to phony super patriotic people who are hiding too long behind the American flag. He accuses them of betraying the ideals of the founders of the American Constitution with their racism. You say the only good niggers are the ones that have died. Don't ever think I'll stand by your side. The same is true of Playboys and Playgirls, another repetitive gospel-influenced sing-along which attacks fallout shelter sellers, red baiters and race haters and castigates the laughter in the lynch mob. This was performed at the Newport Folk Festival in 1963 as a duet with Pete Seeger, who encourages the audience to join in. Other songs in this vein do attempt some minimal poetic effects. Train a Travelling, also recorded for Broadside, is another anti-racist rant which, in its first two verses, employs some rather well-worn metaphors. There's an iron train a-travelling that's been rolling through the years with a firebox of hatred and a furnace full of fears. Long Ago, Far Away, recorded as a Whitmark demo, employs irony in a rather obvious way, cataloguing a list of ills from the past that are still occurring today, and concluding each verse with the refrain, "Things like that don't happen no more nowadays, do they?" Other early compositions resembled the songs which were then being used to provide strength and support to followers of the civil rights movement, which was closely linked to Black American churches. Martin Luther King, the unofficial leader of the movement, delivered highly dramatic and stirring speeches that closely resembled the style of Southern preachers. At meetings and demonstrations, crowds would roar out communal anthems which were adaptations of gospel hymns such as "We Shall Overcome" and "We Shall Not Be Moved." Dylan's "Ain't Gonna Grieve," recorded for a Whitmark demo in August 1963, is an adaptation of an old spiritual with choruses which merely repeat "Ain't gonna grieve no more, no more," into which Dylan injects an anti-racist slant. "Brown and blue and white and black, all one colour on the one-way track. We got this far and it ain't going back." "I'd Hate to Be You on That Dreadful Day" is one of several songs Dylan contributed under the interesting pseudonym of Blind Boy Grunt to sessions recorded for the Agit folk magazine Broadside. It presents a generalised message to social oppressors and corrupt politicians, warning them that they will get their comeuppance on Judgment Day. Talking Devil, also recorded for Broadside, contains a verse with a particularly cutting last line which suggests that the devil himself is a member of a Ku Klux Klan. "Well, sometimes you can't see him so good when he hides his head neath a snow-white hood and rides to kill with his face well hid, and then goes home to his wife and kids." Dylan also began experimenting with the ballad form, using traditional tunes and adding his own narratives, much as Guthrie had done. The Walls of Red Wing, The Death of Emmett Till, and The Ballad of Donald White all spell out their messages bluntly. Red Wing is set in a young offenders institution in which Dylan assumes the identity of a prisoner. Although the song does have an attractive melody based on the Scottish traditional air "The Road and the Miles to Dundee," there is little subtlety or irony here. The song consists almost entirely of accounts of the brutality that the inmates are subjected to. We are told that from the dirty old mess hall you march to the brick wall, too weary to talk and too tired to sing. The prisoners are bowed and beaten by sadistic guards. There are a few poetic moments, though, such as "The night aimed shadows through the crossbar windows" and "The keys of the guards click the tune of the morning." But some of the rhymes, such as "smiling," "woodpiling," sound especially contrived. The Death of Emmett Till, which was debuted on the Cynthia Gooding radio show in February 1962, and which uses a speeded up version of the melody of "The House of the Rising Sun," is a venomous attack on Southern white racism. It relates the story of the 1955 murder of a black teenager who was visiting his cousins in the South, when he was viciously murdered by white racists for the crime of speaking in an over-familiar way to a white shop girl. This became a cause célèbre for the civil rights movement after the murderers were freed without charge by an all-white jury. Later, under the protection of double jeopardy laws, they freely admitted their crime. Several other protest songs had been written about the event. Dylan's account is extremely graphic. He tells us that the murderers tortured him and did some things too evil to repeat. There were screaming sounds inside the barn. There were laughing sounds out on the street. But later he lectures his audience in a rather manic, hysterical manner. "If you can't speak out against this kind of thing, a crime that's so unjust, your eyes are filled with dead man's dirt, your mind is filled with dust. Your arms and legs, they must be in shackles and chains, and your blood, it must refuse to flow, for you let this human race fall down, so God awful low. Although the song shows Dylan's immaturity as a writer, his unstinting, uncensored expression of feelings here certainly engages us, predicting the venomous approach of more sophisticated songs such as Masters of War. Dylan took the story of the Ballad of Donald White, which is written from the point of view of White himself, from a contemporary newspaper report. It's one of the few songs in this group which uses the point of view of a narrator, taking its melody, some of the lyrics, and its narrative method from the Ballad of Peter Emberley, a 19th century song lamenting the accidental death of a lumberjack. It recounts the story of a man who finds it impossible to fit in with society, who only feels secure in prison. Eventually, he commits a murder in order to be returned to jail, but receives a death sentence which, rather disarmingly, he seems to think he actually deserves. As with Emmett Till, the narrative is unfiltered and quite brutal. White's honesty is chilling. After recounting the reasons for committing the murder, he tells us, "I'm glad I've had no parents to care for me and cry, for they will never know the horrible death I die." He also confesses to being glad he has no friends and tells his listeners that, "I guess you'll feel much better when I'm on that hanging tree." In some ways, the song recalls the confessions of sin in classic country prison songs like Hank Williams' "I Heard That Lonesome Whistle Blow" and Johnny Cash's "Folsom Prison Blues," both of which are also first-person narratives. But unlike the narrators of those songs, Donald White shows no remorse. By presenting his story as a first-person narrative, Dylan invites us to sympathize with him. But while the song is certainly an indictment of the American mental health system, it's also clear that White is a sociopath. Thus, whereas Emmett Till dictates its morality to the audience, this song is more ambivalent. As Dylan matures as a songwriter, he will alternate between songs with a clear moral message and songs which leave their conclusions more open. Dylan's main concerns in these kinds of songs is with social equality and justice. The songs become increasingly dramatic, often drawing listeners into a narrative before providing a twist that turns everything around. Under the influence of radical German playwright, poet and songwriter Bertolt Brecht, he also becomes skilled in the use of dramatic irony, at a level which Guthrie never attained. In the very brief Man on the Street, based on the 19th century song The Strange Death of John Doe, he achieves an authentically shocking effect by showing the death of a nameless old tramp in an unemotional, matter-of-fact way. He describes how a crowd gathers around the man, telling us that they stopped and stared and went their way. A policeman arrives who at first threatens to arrest the old man for vagrancy. "Get up, old man, or I'm taking you down." He then jabbed him once with his bully club, and the old man, he rolled off the curb. Finally, he declares, "Call the wagon, this man is dead." The narrative here displays a brutal clarity reminiscent of Hemingway's prose. The later song, Only a Hobo, tells the same basic story, but with a stronger tune and a rather rousing chorus. Only a hobo, but one more is gone, leaving nobody to sing his sad song, leaving nobody to carry him home. He was only a hobo, but one more was gone. The song contains some evocative descriptions. The man's face is grounded in the cold sidewalk floor. We hear that a blanket of newspaper covered his head, as the curb was his pillow, the street was his bed. The broader social context is hinted at using deliberate understatement. In the final verse, in which Dylan appeals to our conscience, the diction of "Does it take much of a man to see his whole life go down, to look up at the world from a hole in the ground?" is relatively reserved and philosophical. As with Blowing in the Wind, Dylan puts questions to his audience that cannot be easily answered. The song was recorded for Broadside and later in the sessions for Freewheeling. It was re-recorded in 1971 with Happy Traum on second guitar and vocals for the More Greatest Hits album, but never made the cut. Perhaps the definitive version is that of Rod Stewart on his brilliant early album Gasoline Alley 1970, where the combination of the song's gentle melody, enhanced by touches of mandolin, and Stewart's rough, edgy vocal is especially effective. Okay, so that's the end of part one. And in part two, we'll be looking at how Dylan's approach to such material becomes rather more sophisticated. Do take a look at my website from the pen of Chris Gregory, www.chrisgregory.org. There's a couple of books I've written on Bob Dylan that are available there, and lots of other writing. See you next time. Bye.
Is it rolling, Bob?
Is it rolling, Bob?
Is it rolling, Bob?